Isabella was 10, almost 11, depending on if you counted that she had been 10 for 6 months and 2 days. But hey, at the moment she was closer to 11 than she was 10, right? Anyway, Isabella knew she was smart for a girl her age. She wasn't arrogant about it or anything, but it was something she was proud of. Isabella figured that her above-average intelligence was due to her love of books. She was reading at a level way ahead of everyone else in her class. In fact, her teachers at school had her tested, and they found out that she was reading at a 12th grade level. The fact that she read so much, she especially loved Dean Koontz and Jim Butcher, was probably why she believed her little brother, who was only 3 years old, when he ran into her room the other night and told her in his toddler talk that he had seen a Nom Nom eat their neighbor's annoying French poodle named Princess Mimi. It happened just after 10 p.m. It was way past both their bedtimes, but she couldn't help it. She was totally engrossed in one of Koontz's amazing Odd Thomas books and just had to find out what happened next when her brother, Santiago, ran into her room and jumped under the covers and cuddled beside her. He was crying and shaking. "Sissy, me scared." Isabella had never seen him like this before. Their mama and papa were strong and brave and had always taught them to be as well. So she knew it was wise to believe him. "What is it, Santi? It's okay. Hush now. Tell Big Sis what's wrong." It took almost 5 full minutes for her to calm him down enough so he could tell her. "Me see a Nom Nom." Isabella understood that toddlers explained the world around them in a very basic way. For example, whenever Santi wanted a bite of her dessert after dinner, he would walk over to her and say, "Sissy, Nom Nom." So whatever he had seen, it clearly had something to do with food. But why would food scare him to the point of crying and shaking? She knew she had to investigate a little further. "What do you mean? Do you want something to eat?" He looked up at her with his big brown eyes, still glistening with tears, though they no longer spilled down his cheeks. He shook his head. "No, Sissy, no." "Of course," she said. "Being hungry wouldn't make you scared like this." She thought for a moment. Then she was hit with inspiration. Nom Nom didn't mean food per se. It also meant to eat or to take a bite. This made more sense. And Nevermore Hollows was a rural town surrounded by miles of dark forest and countryside. Maybe Santi saw a coyote or something and knew it would prey upon other animals. "Did you see an animal from the woods?" Santiago considered her question as if she were close but not enough to help him explain what he'd seen. "Me not sure," he said. Then his lower lip quivered. "But it's scary." Isabella leaned back against her headboard, one arm around her little brother, and her free hand playing with the end of her braided hair that fell over her shoulder. "But it looked like an animal." Santiago hesitated. "A whittle." "Did you see it come from the woods?" This was a fair question because they lived in a lovingly maintained craftsman home in a nice neighborhood that butted up against the forest. Santiago nodded. From woods," he said. "Did it look like a dog?" "No, Sissy, not dog." She said. "Maybe this will help. What made it scary?" Santiago's lip trembled more. He was on the verge of tears again. Big mouth, big teeth. It monster, sissy. It nommed Princess Mimi. Isabella sat up straight. So you saw this thing from the woods eat our neighbor's dog? She was barking an awful lot a few minutes ago, and then it just stopped. I was about to step outside and tell her to please shut up so I could read. How did you see this happen? Santiago was now sitting up, legs crossed, facing her. 'Cause Princess Mimi bark, me look out window, me see it eat her. Okay, Isabella said as she got out of bed. Let's go to your room and look out the window and see what we see. Santiago was initially too scared, but he knew his sister was brave like Papa and Mama always said they should be. So he wiped his eyes, crawled out of bed, and gave her his strongest, bravest look. They tiptoed down the hallway so not to wake Mama and Papa, sneaked into Santiago's room and over to the window. She did not turn on the lights when they entered because it would make it easier to see outside and would also keep them hidden in the shadows. Santi's window looked out onto the street. Evenly spaced street lamps cast pale cones of light onto the sidewalks. There were no Nom Noms that she could see, not that Isabella knew yet what she should even be looking for. But there, in a circle of street lamp light, was Princess Mimi's dog collar, lying in a pool of blood. The next day, everyone chalked up the poor Poochie's demise to being eaten by a coyote. But when Isabella showed Santi a picture of a coyote, he shook his head and said, "No, sissy, not that." Then he said something that forced her to use the flexibility of a well-read mind as a tool to solve the case. Smaller, no forelegs, only two, and was pink. Isabella's mind was now fully open to all possibilities. She wondered if the critter Santi saw was some kind of cryptid. If so, it was something she'd never heard of before, which was saying a lot because she read all kinds of stuff about cryptids and had learned that there were lots of strange creatures that hid in the shadows. So she decided to start surveillance over the next few nights and see if she could catch a glimpse of the Nom Nom. The first 2 nights were a bust, even though she stayed up past 3 a.m. looking out of Santi's window while he slept. But on the 3rd night, she was sitting in the dark reading a Jim Butcher novel by candlelight when she caught movement in the street below. She sat the book aside, snuffed out the candle, and peered out the window onto the gloomy street below. Something was moving among the dark hedges that separated their yard from their neighbor's property to the left. She held her breath as it slowly began to take shape as it moved toward the lamplight on the sidewalk. She was disappointed to see that it was only a raccoon. It sneaked out of the hedgerow and into the light and over to their trash can. It glanced around to make sure it wasn't seen, then reached up and started to pull at the trash can lid. And that's when the Nom Nom made its way out of the gloom and crept up behind the raccoon. Even though Isabella's mind was flexible, what she saw didn't make sense to her, and she almost thought that she was hallucinating. The creature was about 2 feet tall. Its torso was oddly shaped, kind of reminding her of a fat jelly bean. It had big oval eyes that shone with a rainbow of dark colors, like you'd see on an oil-slick road after a midnight rain. It stood on 2 powerful legs. Each foot had 3 toes that ended with sharp claws. Its arms were smaller, and it held them close to its sides like a tiny T-Rex. Each hand had only 2 abnormally long fingers, but seemed clawless from what she could see. A short tail weaved menacingly back and forth, and it was covered in short hair like that of a chihuahua, except that it was pink in color. As strange as it was, though, what made it terrifying was its large mouth, which was filled with rows of shark-like teeth. The raccoon saw the Nom Nom and hissed a warning. The Nom Nom struck so fast that it became a pink blur. It shot forward, wrapped 2 fingers around the raccoon's throat and 2 fingers around its waist, and ripped the raccoon's head off in a bloody spray. Then it opened its impossibly wide mouth and dropped the head inside and began chewing. When it had swallowed the head, it bent down and started tearing large chunks, bones and all, from the raccoon. Isabella could hear the muted crunching, and her stomach got queasy. A rabbit hopped out of the hedges across the street. To Isabella's shock, 2 more Nom Noms shot from the dark yard behind the poor creature. They each grabbed a leg and ripped the bunny apart and shoveled its limbs into their mouths. These 2 Nom Noms were the same as the first one, except for their skin. One was covered in wispy tufts of bright blue feathers that resembled those that a baby bird would have. Another was covered in what appeared to be bright green scales. When they had finished eating the bunny, they were joined by the pink one, and then they ran back into the dark night. Isabella sat back in her chair. She was shaking. Her mind raced. What were these creatures? Was she correct in thinking that they lived in the forest? Are they new to the area? They had to be. These were vicious little predators, and if they had been in the area longer, there would be more missing neighborhood pets. Then, the most disturbing question popped in her head. Do they only eat animals? She shot up from her chair and paced around Santi's dark room. She knew in her gut that the Nom Noms would eat whatever they felt they could take down, whether it be pets, forest animals, or humans. She hoped that the Nom Noms were nocturnal, only hunting at night, because there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood. If these creatures hunted during the day, then the kids wouldn't be safe. Heck, nobody would be safe, not even Mr. Kjelland, who was Norwegian and looked like a Viking with his massive muscles, long hair, and braided beard. She glanced at Santi, sleeping peacefully in his bed. She would do anything to protect him and the other folks in the neighborhood. She had to let everyone know. But would anybody believe her that these creatures existed? She didn't have a phone, which she never really cared about because she knew it would only be a distraction from her books. Sure, she could use an app to read, but she loved the feel of a book and the smell of the pages. You couldn't get that from an app on a cell phone. But she had to figure out a way to get proof that these creatures existed. Then she remembered her mama's old digital camera that she kept in the hallway closet. She tiptoed to the closet, grabbed the camera and its charger, then went back to Santi's room. She was surprised to see that the camera had a 20% charge, but she plugged it into the outlet under the window anyway. Then she sat in the chair looking out onto the quiet street until sleep overtook her. Even though she had been up late, she did not sleep in. Mama and Papa were going out of town to celebrate their wedding anniversary, and she wanted to spend time with them before they left. She was also excited to see Matilda again. Matilda was the girl that Mama and Papa used as a babysitter. Matilda may not look like someone you'd leave your most precious children with, but she was really very nice and tough. Papa told people that he trusted Matilda because she was cool under pressure and could kick butt. She was a brown belt in Kung Fu and had won the state high school tournament in girls archery. And Isabella just loved the way she dressed. Matilda's love of punk and rockabilly music was reflected in her fashion choices. She wore a black poodle skirt, and yes, the poodle was a cute skeleton, combat boots that she had spray-painted pink, and T-shirts with skulls or flowers, depending on her daily whimsy. She wore her hair in a ponytail that was tied with a big pink and black striped bow, and she topped it all off with a pair of black cat-eye glasses. And she didn't wear all this ironically or to draw attention to herself. Matilda wore this because that's what she liked, and she simply didn't care what other people thought about it. Matilda oozed cool. The fact that Matilda had just become the new lead singer for the local band called the Unpretties made her even cooler. It was 4 p.m. when Matilda arrived. Mama and Papa thanked her, kissed Isabella and Santi, then left for Atlanta, where they'd get on a plane and fly to Seattle, where they'd celebrate their anniversary. After they'd left, Matilda ordered pizza from Dante Inferno's and said, "Okay, what movies are we going to watch tonight? Frankenstein or The Thing from Another Planet?" "I don't think I want to watch a movie tonight," Isabella said. She wanted to get settled and catch the Nom Noms on camera. Matilda gave her a curious look. "We always watch a classic horror movie. What's going on?" Isabella was suddenly struck with the thought that if anybody in the whole world would believe her and Santi about the Nom Noms, it would be Matilda. Duh, she thought. How can I be so dense? This just goes to show nobody is ever as smart as they think they are. So, in a rush of words, she unloaded on Matilda, who did not interrupt a single time and allowed Isabella to get it all out. When she finished, Matilda looked at Santi and said, "These things that Big Sis just described, is that what you saw eat Princess Mimi?" "See," Santiago said, nodding his head. "Sissy say right. It's scary." Matilda took a moment to consider what she'd been told. "Okay, safety first. No playing outside today, and you do everything I tell you. Second, let's set up that camera and prepare for a stakeout tonight." Matilda retrieved her bow and quiver of arrows from her 1962 Oldsmobile Starfire convertible. She babied this car because it had belonged to her dad before he passed away. He had lovingly restored it with gleaming red and white paint. Then, they found a tripod for the camera and set it up in Santi's room so that it overlooked the neighborhood. They strategically set some candles about so that when lit, it would allow them to see without drawing attention to them while they were watching. By then, the pizza arrived, and sure that the Nom Noms were not yet bold enough to roam the street in daylight, they ate and conducted research on Matilda's computer. Though they tried to find references to the creatures that Isabella and Santiago had seen, they came up empty. "What do you think they are?" Isabella asked. She glanced over at Santi, who was on the floor playing with some action figures. "I can't even venture a guess until I see them," Matilda replied. "Do you think there's something ancient like Bigfoot or fairies or Nessie?" Isabella asked. Matilda pursed her ruby-red lips together while she pondered. Possibly, but I wonder if there's something new." Isabella's eyes shot wide. "Well, I hadn't considered that. You mean like a new life form created by a mad scientist?" Matilda took a sip of her soda as she considered her response. National Geographic wrote an article a few years ago about scientists in government-funded laboratories creating hybrid animals. This is no longer fringe, cuckoo, or conspiracy theory stuff here. So, while we don't know of any labs around Nevermore Hollows, it doesn't mean that there isn't one hidden around somewhere. Dunwich Forest is massive and could hide any number of secret facilities, government or otherwise. "So, you think the Nom Noms are hybrids?" Isabella asked. Matilda shrugged. "Who knows? It's just a theory. But what you described seems like something created from twisted minds. Either way, they're clearly dangerous. They passed the time doing more research and proposing other theories. Finally, darkness fell upon them. They turned on the camera, then had snacks and sodas for the sugar and caffeine so that they could stay awake. Nothing happened until 10:30. That's when Mr. Nelson came strolling down the dimly lit sidewalk, walking his Great Dane, who he named Lars after the drummer from Metallica, who was also a Dane. Mr. Nelson was funny like that. Everybody loved him for his quirky sense of humor. "Oh, crap," Matilda said. She popped herself on the forehead with an open palm. "We didn't think about warning people who might be out this late. We have to let him know that he might be in danger." She shot up out of her chair, reached for the window, intending to open it and yell at Mr. Nelson to run back home or at least come inside with them. But before she could get the window open, the Nom Noms attacked. It was the three that Isabella had seen a few nights before. They set upon Lars first. The pink one clamped its shark teeth into his throat. The fuzzy feathered blue one bit down on one of his hind legs. The green scaly one chomped down on his tail, and though Lars fought ferociously, the Nom Noms dragged him down. Matilda got the window open, grabbed her bow, notched an arrow, and let loose. The arrow thudded into the blue Nom Nom's chest. It let go of Lars and let out a shriek of pain and rage. It snatched at the shaft while the pink and green Nom Nom continued savaging the dog. Mr. Nelson snapped out of his shock, and his face contorted into grief as he realized that Lars was not going to survive, though he fought back as best he could, considering his belly had been ripped open and he was losing so much blood. Mr. Nelson snatched a pistol that he kept in a holster hidden under his shirt and fired off a shot that sent his beloved Lars free from his misery. Then he ran toward the house. "The front door is open!" Matilda yelled as she notched another arrow, ready to lay down cover for Mr. Nelson. He was in his 60s and had lost the speed of youth, but Matilda hoped the monsters would be too preoccupied eating Lars to give chase. The blue one tried to pull the arrow free, but only succeeded in snapping the shaft. It tossed it aside, locked eyes onto Mr. Nelson, clearly ready to give chase. Matilda let loose the second arrow, and it sunk into its head. It dropped to the ground, gave a twitch, and went still. She notched a third arrow. The other two Nom Noms were now in a blood-soaked frenzy. The pink one lifted its head and gave a lustful growl. The green one suddenly noticed Mr. Nelson, who was only halfway across the gloomy yard, and shot off after him. The pink one took a final bite of Lars, then followed. Matilda let loose 2 arrows in rapid succession, but these creatures were so fast that both arrows missed their mark. Mr. Nelson ran up onto the porch. Matilda and Isabella and Santiago heard him hit the door, rattle the handle, finally get it open, then slam the door behind him. The Nom Noms ran across the yard and hammered against the door, growling and snarling. "Stay here," Matilda said. "Lock the door behind me." She shot down the stairs to make sure Mr. Nelson was okay and to ensure he secured the door. She said a prayer that the Nom Noms didn't realize they could easily smash through the windows. She saw Mr. Nelson with his back against the door, breathing heavily, his face pale. "What are those things?" he said. "We don't know," Matilda said, "but the kids call them Nom Noms." She heard movement behind her and turned to see that Isabella and Santiago had not taken her direction. They came running down the stairs. "We want to help," Isabella yelled. Before Matilda could reprimand them, the glass on the sidelight beside the door shattered as the green Nom Nom burst through. It hit the floor hard, rolled, then righted itself. It stood between Mr. Nelson and Matilda and the kids. Matilda lifted her bow and let loose a shot. Because of how close they were, the arrow went straight through the creature's neck and thudded into the wall behind it. The creature's blood was surprisingly bright. It glimmered as it ran down its torso. Just then, the pink Nom Nom shot through the broken window and chomped down onto Mr. Nelson's leg, pulling him to the ground. Mr. Nelson squeezed off a shot. The bullet tore through the creature's shoulder. The green one swiped a scaly hand at the wound in its neck. Then, it lunged at Matilda, its mouth wide. It was too close now for her to try another arrow, but she was able to swing her bow and club the beast across the head. It slammed against the wall, but immediately lunged again. Matilda ran toward the kids, shooing them back up the stairs, the beast hot on her heels. Mr. Nelson was screaming, but still putting up a fight, even though he was bleeding badly. He had somehow been able to grab the Nom Nom by the throat with his left hand, holding its snapping jaws away from him, and he aimed his pistol between its eyes and pulled the trigger. The Nom Nom's head exploded, splattering the wall and the floor with gore. Wasting no time, he pulled himself up from the floor and hobbled to the foot of the stairs, hoping he could get a clear shot at the final Nom Nom. "Damn," he hissed when he realized there was no clear line of fire. He had bone-deep gashes on his leg and both arms. He was losing a lot of blood, but he forced himself to hobble up the stairs, determined to help kill the damn thing and protect these kids. Matilda and Isabella and Santiago got to the top of the stairs and shot across the hall toward the bathroom. When the Nom Nom hit the top step, it leaped and landed on Matilda, knocking her to the floor. Her 2 remaining arrows fell from the quiver strapped across her shoulder and slid toward the bathroom. Matilda was able to roll onto her back. The Nom Nom stood astride her. She grabbed the creature by the throat, stopping it from chewing on her, but the creature had also wrapped its long fingers around her throat and was choking her. Isabella pushed Santi inside the bathroom and slammed the door shut. Then she turned, snatched one of the arrows from the floor, and ran to the green, scaly Nom Nom that was attacking Matilda. She used the arrow as a spear and plunged it deep into the creature's stomach. The Nom Nom snarled in rage, but it loosened its grip from around Matilda's neck. Matilda heard Mr. Nelson pounding up the stairs and hoped that he still had his gun and that what she was about to do would be timed perfectly. Matilda twisted her hips with all her strength, threw the Nom Nom away from her, down the hallway. It hit the floor, rolled, and pushed itself up. Mr. Nelson reached the top of the steps just as the Nom Nom tore the arrow free from its stomach and leaped into the air, aiming for Matilda. He raised his gun and fired. The bullet slammed into the Nom Nom's head, spraying gore against the wall. The Nom Nom's body fell to the floor. Matilda pushed herself up. She wrapped Isabella in a hug. "Thank you. You helped save my life. That was so brave of you." Then she turned to Mr. Nelson. "You too. Thank you. Now come on, let me help stop your bleeding." Santiago was crying softly behind the bathroom door. "It's okay, Santi," Isabella said. "You can unlock the door and come out. We killed the Nom Noms." Santiago opened the door and ran to Isabella. She hugged him tightly. Matilda took Mr. Nelson into the bathroom and used a couple towels to staunch the bleeding. She then called 911 and told the dispatcher that they had been attacked by strange creatures and to send an ambulance for Mr. Nelson. The sheriff and a bunch of deputies and some paramedics and a really nice woman named Alyssa, who was the coroner and medical examiner, all showed up and asked a lot of questions. Isabella found it very curious that none of them seemed surprised that such creatures as the Nom Noms existed. In fact, Isabella suspected that they already knew that monsters were real. And she gathered that this was a team of folks that worked to keep it all secret. Isabella marveled at the idea that there were things out there that were unexplainable, and she wanted to be part of it. So, suspecting that Miss Alyssa was cataloging these monsters, possibly building a database of some sort, she became determined to convince this woman that she could help. So, she mustered her courage, stood, dusted herself off, and walked over and introduced herself.